Outgoing DNI chief Tulsi Gabbard is blowing the whistle on Dr. Anthony Fauci, and it couldn't come at a worse time for the former NIAID director. This is really a bombshell because she is unveiling a lot of his intelligence community contacts and the shady web that he was immersed in, including the CIA. So before we get into this story, please like, share, and comment on this video. We really appreciate your support at the Becker Brief. Now, Tulsi Gabbard may be leaving. She resigned, you might recall, citing the health of her husband. And of course, we wish them a speedy recovery in his battle with his illness. But the thing forefront on a lot of Americans' minds right now is Dr. Anthony Fauci and whether or not he misled Congress. So one of the things that is an interesting backdrop to his activities as a top COVID response doctor during the Trump administration and later into the Biden administration is that he had a lot of seedy ties with the CIA. And why do I say that? Well, of course, the CIA is entitled to interview experts when it comes to matters of national security. And Fauci certainly knew a lot about gain-of-function research. He, of course, was funding it through a cutout, the EcoHealth Alliance, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And they were engaging in gain-of-function research there. And you might recall the Bat Lady, whose research was used at the Wuhan lab. And of course, there was a case outbreak in that vicinity that was kept under wraps by the Chinese government, but the Chinese military was stockpiling PPEs. There's a lot of other intelligence that they knew that this viral pandemic was coming, and they didn't alert the appropriate authorities, at least as far as we know, because Dr. Anthony Fauci, in his new diary, which is what it's being called popularly, noted back in January 2020 that he didn't believe the wet market was the actual source of the viral outbreak. And thus it calls into question why he was notifying scientists in the community and working to get them to downplay the lab leak theory. That's because Fauci's fingerprints was all over it. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, she's blowing the whistle on his ties to the intelligence community. It brings up what are the deeper motives at play for Fauci to have been involved in such risky and dangerous gain-of-function research with an enemy of the United States. Now, I hear a lot of people say that China is an adversary of the United States, but they are currently funding and arming Iran at this point right now, giving them military arms and support in their war against the United States. So it's hard to interpret their activities, including their espionage and their compromising of U.S. politicians, as anything but a hostile actor in regards to U.S. policy. So therefore, was the COVID pandemic, at least in terms of the cover-up, a form of asymmetric warfare against the United States? I think it's difficult to argue to the contrary. I think there was a number of cover-ups. We might remember the WHO sending an expedition to China that essentially let them off the hook for a lot of their wrongdoing, although there was some complaining about the cover-up or the lack of notification to the world about the viral infection outbreak in China. So we have Dr. Rand Paul during his testimony of Dr. Anthony Fauci, of course, on Wednesday. He really laid out that Fauci was tied to the intelligence community, and all Fauci could do was plead the fifth. Let's take a look.
Dr. Fauci, did the CIA ever transfer funds to NIH under an interagency agreement?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
Dr. Fauci, did the NIH ever conduct research for or in coordination with any element of the intelligence community, CIA, ODNI?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The reason why these questions are important is, President Trump has done a ban, and we're glad that he did a ban on gain-of-function research. So we're better off than we were when we had an advocate serving as head of NIAID, an advocate for gain-of-function research. There is still, though, a question, whether or not the intelligence community is adhering to that order. There's a question of whether or not gain-of-function research is still ongoing. And these are important questions the American people deserve to know. Dr. Fauci.
As I note on my Substack, Relentless, from the archives, that Fauci was shuttled into CIA headquarters and was effectively someone who was participating in their drafting of the assessment of the COVID origins. Now, we know that the Department of Energy and the FBI both came to the conclusions ultimately that they leaned towards a hypothesis that the SARS-CoV-2 virus started in the Wuhan laboratory and not a wet market in Wuhan. But interestingly enough, there is a lot of scientific research that backs the very strong probability that this was a man-made virus. Ultimately, it has to do with the fur and cleavage site research that was done at North Carolina, among other places. But Dr. Ralph Barrick had a blueprint, essentially, for making this sort of Frankenstein virus. That was something that did cause the virus to gain in function. So is Fauci guilty of perjury, misleading Congress? We're going to see if he's guilty of contempt of Congress in a vote forthcoming. That will be a Senate committee vote and not the entire Congress. But essentially, this would not be unprecedented. There have been a number of Trump officials that have been found either guilty of misleading Congress or contempt of Congress. Trump officials such as Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, some others who have been found guilty of this. So is Dr. Anthony Fauci above the law? We're going to find out. Stay tuned. And as always, please like and share the Becker Brief. We always appreciate hearing from you and your support.
Before the COVID pandemic, Dr. Fauci, as head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, provided millions in U.S. taxpayer dollars to fund dangerous gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, work which is now widely viewed as the source of the unintentional lab leak that sparked the pandemic. Now, in support of President Trump's maximum transparency mandate, today, on my final day as Director of National Intelligence, I'm releasing never-before-seen communications and documents that expose exactly how Fauci worked with politicized career leadership in the intelligence community to suppress the truth about his actions, the virus's lab leak origins, and his role in directing U.S. funding for this dangerous research that caused immeasurable harm and countless lost lives. Now, these documents expose Fauci's direct role in influencing and manipulating IC assessments on COVID-19 and how Fauci lied to Congress in 2024 when, under oath, he denied knowledge of or participation in discussions with intelligence officials about viral research. We also received testimony from multiple intelligence community whistleblowers who reported retaliation for challenging the intelligence community's manipulation of intelligence on the virus's origins, once again revealing a clear pattern of suppressing dissent, silencing critics, and burying the truth. Dr. Fauci's close relationships with the intelligence community enabled him to assume three key roles that shield him from scrutiny. First, Dr. Fauci funded dangerous gain-of-function coronavirus research linked to Big Pharma and their pursuit of universal vaccines worth trillions of dollars. Second, Dr. Fauci was the behind-the-scenes advisor who, alongside his hand-picked so-called experts, pushed the intelligence community to endorse a natural animal origin to hide his dangerous gain-of-function research that he funded using taxpayer dollars, all of this in a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth and shift the blame and attention away from Fauci's own actions. Third, Dr. Fauci became the nation's pandemic pundit, and he publicly pushed lies, disinformation, and censorship using every platform available. Now, according to hundreds of reviewed emails, which are included in this release, the intelligence community almost always incorporated Fauci's recommendations. He promoted a fraudulent paper whose publication he helped prompt as legitimate information for intelligence community consideration. Senior analysts praised Dr. Fauci not as a policymaker, but as what they called an unbiased guide to the real coronavirus experts, while deliberately ignoring experts who might dissent from Fauci's narratives. Now, Fauci didn't stop there. He blatantly lied to Congress under oath during his 2024 testimony to the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, denying that he ever spoke to any intelligence agency about COVID. Now, the correspondence I'm releasing today directly contradicts his sworn testimony. Now, we received statements from multiple whistleblowers revealing that the intelligence analysts who dared to challenge Dr. Fauci's COVID origin conclusions faced threats of retaliation, marginalization, and many suffered career setbacks. For example, a contractor was terminated just days after coming forward to ODNI as a whistleblower. Another example, those who advocated for the lab leak hypothesis or expressed dissenting views were reminded by their managers that leadership would determine which analysts would be promoted and which would not. The message was clear: go along or be punished. Senior leaders also sought to undermine whistleblowers by removing anonymity, which is required in the whistleblower process, as they made their complaints, and also insisting that their managers or attorneys be present during ODNI meetings where these whistleblowers were coming forward with their testimony, obviously creating an atmosphere of intimidation. The COVID pandemic caused tremendous hardship and pain for millions of our fellow Americans and countless people around the world. Now, after years of lies and censorship and cover-ups, the American people deserve transparency, truth, and accountability. The tactics that were used to hide the truth are straight from the deep state playbook. Politicized, self-serving leaders like Dr. Fauci covered up their own wrongdoing and abuses of power, manipulated intelligence, lied to Congress, and undermined a duly elected president by restricting his access to the vital facts he needed to keep the country safe. It's time you know the truth.